Hi and welcome to another edition of the Brian A. Joyce Report. I'm Senator Brian Joyce, and I have the honor of representing you and your family along with the towns of Avon, Braintree, Canton, East Bridgewater, Easton, Milton, Randolph, Sharon, Stoughton, and West Bridgewater in the Massachusetts Senate. The purpose of this program is to keep you up to date on what's happening in the legislature, as well as to discuss the vital issues that affect your lives every day. We'll also introduce you to some interesting guests who are some of our most important decision makers in Massachusetts. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Representative Hank Naughton, who serves the 12th Worcester District, which includes the towns of Berlin, Boylston, Clinton, Lancaster, parts of Northborough, and Sterling. Hank Naughton currently serves as the House Chairman of the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security. He has served in the Massachusetts House of Representatives since 1995. Prior to his election, Hank was a prosecutor in the Worcester County District Attorney's Office. He's continued to practice law in his own firm and concentrates on litigation, criminal defense, local, national, and international development issues. Here's what's real interesting about Hank. Following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, at age 43, Hank joined the United States Army Reserve. He's now a major. He has served tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan and participated in an advisory mission in the Congo. He's currently assigned to the 3rd Legal Operational Detachment and has an adjunct to the Defense Security Corporation Agency, Defense Institute of International Legal Studies. That's a mouthful. In 2011, United States Secretary of State Hillary Clinton appointed Naughton to the International Security Advisory Board. That board, made up of 24 members, provides the department with independent insight and advice on all aspects of arms control, disarmament, international security, and related aspects of public diplomacy. The board provides its recommendations directly to the Secretary of State. Secretary of State John Kerry reappointed Hank Naughton to the board in 2013. Most recently, Representative Naughton has been assigned to the U.S. Department of State Political Military Bureau, working on the rule of law and status of forces agreements as the war in Afghanistan enters its final stages. Rep. Naughton's currently seeking re-election for his current seat, which is the 12th Worcester District. So I want to thank you. So here's the thing. We usually have candidates for statewide office on this show introduce themselves to the voters in my little neck of the woods. We were hoping you were going to be a candidate for statewide office. You know, you were looking at Attorney General, you were looking at Lieutenant Governor, you've decided to run for re-election.
I have, and I had actually started out on the road to running for Attorney General, spent the last several months doing it. But quite honestly, a couple things happened within the past month, one being the enhanced duties that I've had with the Army Reserve. When the Reserve assigned me to the State Department's Political Military Bureau and the duties that you just spoke of, it really started taking up more of my nights and weekends. And that combined with a lot going on in the House that I think will be beneficial to my district, to central Massachusetts, and the entire Commonwealth that I can participate in, kind of brought me back around to say, I think this isn't the time. It should be time to stay in the House. And
so I want to just go back to what I said earlier, though, how remarkable it was. You were, you know, at the time of September 11, 2001, you were 41 years old. Is that
correct?
Right? Married, 3 children?
3, 1 more on the way.
Your 4th child was on the way, right. And so obviously that's probably the most significant event of our lifetimes, and many of us reacted in many different ways. We were all just indelibly impressed by what happened and what an extraordinary tragedy it was to our country. But you went out and joined the military. How many middle-aged guys did that?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I went home one night, probably about a month after 9/11, and realized what I had. A beautiful home, beautiful wife, 3 kids, another on the way. Nice law practice, successful political career. But to me, something was missing. I felt I had been blessed. And I always looked to my dad, who has since passed away, but he was a veteran of the Second World War, a veteran of D-Day. And that entire generation that had set that example, I thought, based on what he did, on how I had been blessed in life, it was time for me. This was my decision. I'm not saying everybody needs to do this, but to step up and kind of continue my public service. And I jumped through some hoops, got some waivers, got into shape, and showed up at basic at 43 years of age, about 17 years older than the next youngest guy there. And so that led to some interesting stories.
How'd you do?
I got through. I survived. And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it pushed me to be a better soldier, better lawyer, better public servant, better dad, better husband to serve my country.
Now you're a major.
Correct.
So you've risen fairly rapidly.
I volunteered to deploy to Iraq in 2005, 2006. I worked in and around Baghdad I helped set up the Central Criminal Court of Iraq, prosecuting Al-Qaeda, foreign fighters, people attacking the Iraqi and the coalition regime. And I think we worked hard. It was during the height of the insurgency, and I think we worked hard to bring some peace and some stability towards central Iraq, towards the Baghdad area, Anbar province, and thereabouts. Unfortunately, we've seen what's going on there now. But I came home with a good feeling that we had done some good things, kind of returned justice to the cradle of civilization. And I continued to serve. It also informed me about the needs of our veterans in the Commonwealth. I subsequently became chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives. And in 2011, the summer of 2011, basically because of a skill set that I've built up in law of armed conflict, rules of engagement, rule of law, I was asked to deploy, and I did, again, volunteer to deploy to Kandahar in Afghanistan. And I showed up there in September of 2011 in the height of a pretty big insurgency. And Kandahar is the home of the Taliban, home of Mullah Omar, home of the Karzais. And so it's kind of Taliban central. And I proceeded for the next 10 months setting up what would be roughly the equivalent of our district courts here in Massachusetts, a very rudimentary system of due process to give the people of that part of the world, that part of Afghanistan, a venue to air their grievances. And they did not have to resort anymore to Taliban justice. And a very, very basic level, 1- and 2-room courthouses, about 5 of them spread around the districts of Kandahar province, which is very remote, and give those people a sense that they're vested in their community and they don't have to resort to Taliban justice of violence. And allow them to have a sense that we can build our communities through this due process, through this rule of law, build their schools, start treating women much better than they do. We worked on opening the first women's shelter in all of Afghanistan because of the horrendous treatment that women receive in that society. And I'm happy to say, now that I've been home a little over a year, that they're still working. I had lunch a couple of months ago at West Point with the fellow who succeeded me, the officer who succeeded me, and he told me that these courthouses, the system of due process was still up and working. It was sustainable. And I hope that it is through the rest of this year and after we phase out of Afghanistan. And so that's kind of led to where I am currently, because that's the job I have now. I was assigned by the Army Reserve to the U.S. Department of State, kind of dovetailing with the appointment that I have originally from Secretary Clinton and currently from Secretary Kerry, to work on issues of rule of law. And as we dovetail, as we phase out of Afghanistan and bring our footprint down to, we'll probably be about 10,000 troops about a year from now, we want to try to keep those issues, those things we've built up over the last 12 years, the issues of rule of law and a sense of justice. We want to try to keep those in place. We sacrifice too much blood and treasure. Over 2,500 of our brothers and sisters.
I want to get back to this, that incredible reaction that you had. I know you had, mentioned the wonderful example of your father and his generation fighting in World War II. But here you were, 40 years old, living in pretty good comfort as a successful attorney, as a successful state representative, and irrespective of how anybody feels about our efforts in Afghanistan or Iraq or where you fall in the political spectrum ideologically, you really can't help but be just taken by your incredible sacrifice and bravery to go into among the most dangerous places, particularly when you talk about where you were in Afghanistan. I've not been to Afghanistan, I've been to Pakistan. Just unbelievable danger, personal risk for the greater good of not just the people of your district in Worcester, but indeed the people of the world. So I got to tell you, I'm pretty blown away by that, pretty impressed. I want to just shift now to where we are presently. You mentioned you're the House Chair of our Veterans Affairs Committee.
Previously, I'm currently the chair of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee, but I was proud to serve as chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee
Along
for a
with
term.
Mike Resch, with whom I serve in the Senate.
Great,
And
great
another
Navy veteran.
I think probably within a week of his being elected to office, he was deployed overseas. So people are often surprised because you think of the military, history of Virginia or some other of the southern states. You don't necessarily think of Massachusetts, and yet we have the best benefits, the most extensive benefits for our veterans in Massachusetts from any state in the Union, correct?
That is correct. And we do as much as we can to continue to enhance those. But historically, going back to the 1860s, going back to the Civil War, our Department of Veterans Affairs is older than the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. And we've always taken that admonition of Abraham Lincoln to care for those who have served and their widows and orphans as a sacred trust here in this Commonwealth. And we do have the broadest array of benefits for our veterans of any state.
Can you talk about some of the best?
Sure. Massachusetts is the only state that requires each city and town to maintain a veteran service office at the local level. So we dovetail the efforts of the VA, of our State Department of Veteran Services, which is led so well by our friend, the Secretary Coleman Nee, and then all of the private nonprofits like Veterans Inc. or the New England Center for Homeless Veterans in Boston, or Soldier On out in the western part of the Commonwealth. And we dovetail those efforts with our local efforts. And then we've passed the Welcome Home Act in our tenure in the legislature, where those that deploy will receive a bonus upon their return of $1,000 upon the return from their first deployment. And because in these last dozen years so many people have deployed on multiple occasions, we make it so that on your second and subsequent deployments you'll get a bonus of $500 when you return. Educational benefits. We're very, very generous in our state institutions, but also we've made moves to identify what we call our MOSs, military occupational specialties. And if you've got some specialty within the military that would otherwise require a license, a plumbing license or carpentry or some type of trade when you return to the Commonwealth, we will, if we have identified that MOS, that military occupational specialty, is the equivalent of what it would take to get that license, we've waived the license fees to allow those people to get out there. We're working currently on an Office of Veterans Business Development so that veterans that return and want to open small businesses, be they law practices or accounting or plumbing firms or some type of electronics company, that will give them that support to keep them in the workforce. Because another thing that we've identified, and people have to remember, and your comments to me are very well taken and are very kind, but I was one of 2 million that have deployed over the last 12 years since 9/11. And what we don't recognize too well enough are the families. When I had one job to do, and that was to come back in one piece. My wife was still at home with 4 kids, running them to school and to dances and to activities. And so we try to recognize the contributions of the families as well. We've still got our 2 soldiers' homes in this Commonwealth to serve veterans both in Holyoke and in Chelsea, that serve veterans who otherwise don't qualify for service at the VA hospitals. So we've got a very broad base level of services to our veterans that you find no place. And I've traveled in my capacity as Veterans Chair, in political capacities, in my reserve capacity around this country. And I can say that. But we don't want to end there. We're currently negotiating between the House and Senate the Valor Act. We want to talk about veterans courts, which down here in Norfolk County, in Dedham, there's a great template that Judge Hogan Sullivan, for people that go into the court system because of issues that they've had during their service, potentially substance abuse issues or post-traumatic stress issues. We want to focus on those veterans and nip it in the bud and get them out of the court system, take care of their issues now. And we want to recognize the fact that the issues facing Iraq and Afghan veterans are different than the issues facing our Vietnam veterans, which are different than the issues facing our World War II veterans. It's a it's developing area, and we want to stay on top of that and take care of the operational tempo of the Iraq and Afghan war is very different than previous wars, and adds to the level of, we anticipate that 1 in 3 returning veterans will exhibit some issues of post-traumatic stress, and that 1 in 7 will have some level of traumatic brain injury because of the level of explosions, of mortar fire, of IEDs, of crashes of the vehicles that they've been in. So we're working with many entities to try to address those issues and be proactive and not just rest on our laurels of the benefits that we provide in the Commonwealth, to look forward and how, because if you think of this, Brian, you know, I'm an old buck for a veteran, but some of the soldiers I was with were 18, 19 years old. And with life expectancy, we will be dealing with the issues of some of these veterans, the 44,000 new veterans from the Commonwealth since 9/11, potentially for 70 years to come. And so it's better to lay the foundation from not just from a moral standpoint, but from a financial standpoint.
And one of the things I'm struck by when you talk to veteran service officers, you talk to leaders like yourself, there's a growing recognition of these injuries that in a previous generation might not have been spoken about, and how many of our returning soldiers have indelibly impaired psychological injuries, and that we are, for the first time, it seems, really addressing head-on the mental health aspect, the post-traumatic stress syndrome that you mentioned. I think 1 in 3 of our veterans is experiencing upon return. And so to the extent that we are, again, leading the nation, it makes me very, very proud to be part of that state that takes this charge so seriously. You have impressed the hell out of me, and I'm sorry that you are not a statewide candidate, and hopefully you will be in the foreseeable future. Let me shift a little bit to your current responsibility as Chair of Homeland Security. We've had this incredible upswing in gun violence throughout Massachusetts. We've seen throughout the country, we've seen children slaughtered. I mean, just unspeakable acts that have happened now more than once. And we see children, we see innocent individuals killed by guns. You're part of a task force now that's trying to come up with legislation to increase the safety for all of us with these firearms that are so readily available. Talk a little bit about that.
After 9/11, after Newtown on December 15th of 2012, about 60 different pieces of legislation were filed within the House and Senate, dealing with all levels of gun violence in our society. And those all came to the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security, who my colleague, your colleague that sits as chair with me is Senator Jim Timilty from down here in this part of the Commonwealth, and does a fantastic job. And we've been working very hard for the past year to try to craft a comprehensive piece of gun safety legislation to address these issues, to get illegal guns. There's a tremendous flow of illegal guns and gun trafficking into the Commonwealth from outside of Massachusetts, because we've got very strict laws here in Massachusetts as far as gun licensing is concerned and the types of firearms that can be sold. But all people have to do is go to New Hampshire or Maine and load up their trunk. And some people do that, and for violent means, for violent reasons. And they'll come down, and those illegal guns will get onto the street. So we're trying to find ways to sweep those off the street. But at the same time, we're trying to look at issues of uniform background checks, universal background checks at every point of sale to try and help prevent that, to institute some enhanced criminal penalties. And one I think of that I would think of we're going to be looking at, including this bill, is, for example, is breaking and entering in the nighttime while in possession of a firearm. Enhance some of the criminal penalties we also already have in the books, to let these miscreants know that we mean business. But we also want to look beyond that. We want to look to the causes. We touch on mental health, same as with veterans. There is still a big stigma on people seeking help for mental health issues in our society. I see it in the military, and we see it in society in general. We want to do whatever we can to take that stigma away from people seeking help for their mental health issues. And we want to provide that support and try to nip that in the bud. And then school safety, because after all, a lot of this is driven by what happened at Newtown and Columbine and West Virginia and other places. So we're working with various groups to come up with best practices on how to keep we're sitting here in a school today, how to keep these, what really are the repositories of our greatest treasure, our children, as safe as possible without turning them into fortresses or armed camps. And we've been getting a lot of good help. The membership of the House and the Senate have been very, very forthcoming and have done great due diligence on this. And I hope within a month or so we're going to be able to produce a pretty groundbreaking and nationwide leading piece of legislation on gun safety.
So we've read a little bit about some of the technological advances. Are you tying that in now to your legislation, or is that further to develop down the road? In other words, so some of the things we read in the paper that maybe you can have some sort of locking mechanism on a gun, that it has to be the owner's fingerprint in order for it to work, or...
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's gotten a little ahead of us. We know of no technology yet that is workable on the fingerprint locks or on the stamping of rounds that is workable at this point. But we're open to anything as we progress into the future. But in this particular legislation, I think we're going to be looking more at prevention, at the background checks, at fixing our licensing system.
Are we handcuffed at all by the federal Constitution? It has been interpreted, the right to bear arms, that citizens have a right to guns. But it also puts, I would imagine, some limitations on what we're able to do on the state level?
Well, the more that happens is the fact that the federal government has done little on the gun violence. We've tried, our own congressional delegation has tried hard, but it's at a point where the states have to lead the way, and Massachusetts has led the way for centuries, not just on gun violence, but you go on women's suffrage, on abolition of slavery. So I think we can lead the way on this as well. Some people have said to me, "Well, how effective is your bill going to be if it's watered down by what goes on in New Hampshire and Maine and surrounding states, and if the feds don't do anything?" And to that, my response is, we can't sit back and not do anything. We can lead the way on it. And secondly, if it saves one life, it's been pretty effective for that person.
It's a fair point. Well, let me just talk about you mentioned the Valor Act 2. Right. There's also the GUARD Act, which is, tell a little bit about that.
Sure, and we had a great hearing on that with General Rice and members of the National Guard last week in front of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee. And we all, know what the National Guard means. We've seen them in action. They do great things. But this isn't your grandfather's National Guard, as they say. What we want to do, and the Guard has proactively come to us, and we want to give them the tools to be the 21st century National Guard. Chapter 33 of the Mass General Laws, which oversees how the National Guard operates, hasn't been renewed, hasn't been changed since 1954. And that was a time of the Cold War, post-World War II. We want to give our National Guard the ability to act not just as they do greatly in natural disasters. I had flooding in my district in 2011. They were fantastic. And in situations like that. But also, it's important for them to assume a Homeland Security role. And we saw that on April 15th of last year. They were literally on the spot immediately. We want to give the National Guard the tools.
Speaking of the Boston Marathon bombing.
Exactly. To be able to respond very quickly, to allow them to be full partners at the local, state, and federal level, to serve a Homeland Security role. They have very experienced MP units, so they could partner with our local and state police. And during the bombing, after the bombing, the National Guard soldiers that were in Boston trying to help out couldn't carry firearms because of the way the current statute is written. They were not on the appropriate status where they could carry firearms. Now, fortunately, in the end, they wouldn't have needed them, but you don't know. So we want to be able to make them full partners with our local public safety groups to be able to carry firearms, but at the same time, so we enhance their role in Homeland Security, but we also have to give them protections for their jobs, protections for their own personal security, educational enhancements. It's unfortunate that there are some employers out there who are not as attentive to their obligations of their employees who are Guard and Reserve members as they should be. And we have had anecdotal stories of people who've lost their jobs because of their activity as a Guardsman or a Reservist. We want to give them that protection. So it's to protect the professionalism of the Guard. It's to give them the tools that they need to operate in a 21st century, post-Cold War, post-9/11 environment, and not just a national defense type of status, but also a homeland security type of status.
Well, one of the issues we didn't even get to was the whole military base issue that you and I worked on in terms of trying to ensure that these bases stay operational in Massachusetts, that contribute to about 46,000 jobs indirectly throughout the state, with the not just the federal government, but our National Guard, and also civilian uses of these bases. But perhaps we'll talk about that another time. I want to wrap up and just say thank you very much for taking the trek to here in God's country, my district, from out in central Massachusetts, where
my pleasure. Thank
they are well represented. And truly struck. I mean, because one of the reasons I wanted to have Hank on was just to kind of debunk. There's an awful lot of naysayers that talk about people that are in public service, and I wanted to give a real example of a selfless individual who, when our country was attacked, decided to just sacrifice everything and join the military and see what he could do to help make the world a little bit safer. So, in addition, I wanted to focus a little bit on our veterans here in Massachusetts, and point out that they are indeed and justifiably given some of the best benefits, in fact, the best benefits of any state in the union. So let me thank Representative Naughton for taking time out of his busy schedule to join us.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for listening. I'm Brian Joyce. And if you have any questions, as always, I can be reached at brian.a.joyce@masenate.gov, or you can give me a call, the old-fashioned way of reaching a person, 617-722-1643. You can find me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter at Brian A. Joyce. Thank you, and goodbye.